My name is Errolson Hugh, and I am the principal designer and co-founder of ACRONYM.
Cool. What is ACRONYM?
ACRONYM is two things. It's a design agency, and it's been a design agency since, oh my God, I have to think now, 1995, I believe.
Okay.
And then it's also a brand, which is probably the more known part of the company. And it's been a brand since our first product came out in 2002.
Okay. Cool. So my first pressing question is, do you shave your own hair or do you go to a barber every week?
What do you do?
I shave my own head.
So do I. Yeah.
Yeah?
Same thing. I'm low maintenance. That's what it's all about. Yeah.
What method do you use?
I used to use an electric razor, but then I lost it. And then,
God forbid you buy another electric razor.
Called down to the hotel reception and send me a razor. And then since then I was like, oh, this works great.
Yeah. Okay. Once a week?
No, it's more like every 3 days, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do once a week.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Okay, there you go.
Bald-headed Asians unite. So going back to 95, you said?
I think it's 95, yeah.
So back up a little bit prior to that. What were you doing before 95?
Before 95, I was painting fences, mowing lawns, teaching random German kids, trying to teach random German kids English, terribly. And whatever I could do, right?
I cannot imagine you were mowing lawns and painting fences.
I would do anything. Anything. I had moved from Germany to, I had moved from Canada to Germany with 700 Canadian dollars, and which is like, 50 United States cents.
It's not that bad.
No, it's not, but it's not a lot of money.
Yeah.
And and didn't speak the language. Didn't speak German. So whatever
you could do,
whatever I could do, I would do.
What city in Canada?
I had moved from Toronto, and in Toronto, I'd met Michaela, who's the other co-founder, and she was from Munich. We were a couple at the time, and after university was over, we met at Ryerson Polytechnical, where we were both studying fashion.
Okay.
And it was the middle of a recession, so that you couldn't even get like a summer job. Like it was hard to my coveted job was like at the video store, like.
And you were golden
the night
with
shift.
that.
And then, but when we graduated, even that stuff was hard to do. So she was like, "I'm going back to Europe," and I was like, "I've never been to Europe."
Yeah,
and took off. So
I was going to ask, like, for a Canadian to go to Germany without the language and without money, it has to be because of a woman.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the story, right?
Right.
It's one of the two things. Either it's a girl or it's a job.
Yeah.
There's never another reason anyone moves, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was your fashion like in Ryerson?
You mean like
you personally and also what you were designing?
I mean, me personally was funny because being a broke student, it was just like, how many days can I wear this before anyone notices?
Limited closet.
Very limited closet. And it was just a lot of, it was into the pin roll. So it was a lot of pin rolled black pants.
Okay.
And like really plain black leather shoes that I just wore out until like they literally had holes. And long sleeve black crew neck t-shirts.
Okay. So you were pretty like
pretty
dark.
Minimal. It was pretty minimal. Yeah, it was super. The black thing's been going on for a long time. Actually, according to my dad, I've been wearing all black since I was. What did he say?
Black diapers.
7 or 10. I can't remember.
Okay.
And so it's like. So before the Japanese designers did all black.
Yeah, right.
before common Yoji.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Were sneakers part of the wardrobe?
Sneakers were actually not a part of the wardrobe. I got the first Nikes I remember buying were Air Moabs, actually.
Okay.
And
interesting. ACG was like
yes,
one of the first sneakers
actually,
you bought.
True. Yeah, in this kind of tan and black colorway.
Yeah, I remember those.
Got them at Foot Locker. And spent like literally all the money I had to buy them. And but before that, I just worn whatever the simplest black leather shoes were.
Okay.
And I think actually because of the karate background that I have, I was never into shoes. I always kind of hated shoes.
Yeah.
So I always felt like I can't feel the floor. I don't know like what my feet are doing. I wanted to be barefoot all the time.
Right.
So any shoe that could get me kind of towards that direction was what I was into. And then the Moab came out, and I tried that on the shop. I just really liked the design, first of all, but then it had the neoprene like sock cuff upper. And
which was pretty revolutionary back then.
And that's what I liked. It was like, okay, this thing is molded onto my foot. It just felt like it's a part of me.
Right.
And that was great.
Yeah.
But I remember a lot of people, this is also Toronto, in Canada, before the internet. And I remember getting like weird questions, like, why are you wearing those shoes? Like, what's the deal? It's like, I'm sure in New York it was a different thing, but...
no, those are weird for everyone.
Oh, okay.
Those are pretty revolutionary. Talk a bit about your like upbringing and background.
I guess the most significant thing about it is two things, actually. One is, like I said, is the karate. Started karate when I was 10. Grew up in this little town called Edmonton in the middle of nowhere in Canada. And,
home of the Oilers.
The Edmonton Oilers. There you go.
Damn. That's literally the middle of Canada, right?
I mean, yeah, slightly north and slightly west. But but yes, like there's nothing. There's not even like hills. It's just flat and, cold.
Right.
Like the two brothers, Chimlusky, I don't know how to pronounce their last name, the Haven brothers, were also from Edmonton, and they described it in their tag on Instagram yesterday as Ice Planet Hoth.
You mean the guys who own Haven?
Yes, which is completely accurate. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So yeah, I grew up there and started doing karate when I was 10. And as I've said in other interviews, that was like the first encounter I had with clothing, where I was like, okay, I can do stuff in this I can't do with my other clothes.
Yeah.
And kind of opened my eyes to like design of apparel affecting your behavior. And then the second big influence at the time was obviously my parents, and they're both in design. So my father is an architect, recently retired, and my mother is an interior designer.
Okay.
So, and also being like from a, I mean, we basically grew up in the studio. They couldn't always afford a babysitter, so they just take us to the office, and we would just hang out and play with all the draftsmen's equipment and ruin everybody's tables and steal their erasers and like all of that stuff.
Right.
So, but we grew up, and then they moved their practice actually into our house. So half of the house in Edmonton was architectural studio, and the other half was, a normal living arrangement. But we never spent any time at the house. We just spent all the time in the office because that's where all the cool stuff was.
Right.
So that had a huge, especially looking back now, it had a huge influence on...
Yeah, just being around.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Just, didn't think about it. Obviously, when you're a kid, you're just like...
It's the parents' job.
Yeah, it's parents, and so you end up playing with like, oh, here's, all these marble tile samples stacked up, and you build something out of it, and then, I'm going to mess around with the blueprint machine for, and like photocopy everything. And, so abusive office equipment was a big thing.
Yeah. You were of what ethnicity?
I'm Chinese, but both of my parents are third generation Jamaican. So, yes. So the only person in my family who speaks Chinese is actually my grandmother. And,
so your parents were born in Jamaica?
Yep. Third generation.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and... yeah, I think aside from my brother, it's just my brother and myself. We don't have Jamaican accents, but I think almost the entire rest of the family does.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I wish I did. That would be way cool, actually. But unfortunately, no.
Wow. And how was Edmonton in terms of like ethnic diversity?
Zero. It was like, it was like fights in the playground. That was what it was.
Yeah.
Like, it was me and my brother, and then maybe like one other Asian kid, one other black kid, and it was on.
Yeah, all the time.
I don't know how to describe it. It was like, so karate was very useful. That was that. I mean, yeah. So after karate, it was interesting because then I don't know what it is, but like after that, pretty much all the fighting pretty much stopped. Like once even though we weren't any good at it, it just changed sort of the way, I guess, that we were perceived. Or,
like your reputation.
I mean, not even just, you just stood your ground, right?
Yeah.
You didn't
run.
And you're like, all right, I'm just going to try this.
Yeah.
And people could see that, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
So that yeah.
Do you think that growing up in that sort of environment of like being a hardcore minority affects even like what you do today and like the aesthetic and the look? Do you think it has any connections, like subliminally?
I think if you would have asked me that 10 years, I would have said no. But now, I would actually say yes, 100% it does. And obviously, when you're growing up in the environment and it is your environment, you can't see it because you're in the middle of it.
Yep.
But having been outside of that now and having traveled the world quite a bit and lived in different places for a little while, there's definite, perceptions and premises that I built my identity on that were rooted in those experiences for sure. And obviously, those are going to come out in your creative work.
Right. Because
so for sure.
I've known you for a while, and you're like, you're a happy, positive person. Like,
I try to be.
Yeah. But I think your reputation of your work is that it's dark and it's cold.
Okay.
And maybe even like ruthless, like just sort of like, yeah, you love that, don't you?
Ruthless is great, yeah.
But like, yeah, so it's like, I wonder if like anything from the past sort of like incepted that feeling to happen of like this darkness.
Yeah, for sure. I've always felt like an outsider. And, my mom also tells stories about like, been talking about leaving Canada since, I was like 7 or 8, right?
You've been wanting to leave Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
According to my mom. She's like, yeah, you're like, and I'd be, in so-called downtown Edmonton and be like, yo, Mom, when are you going to go to the city? Like, I want to see the city. And she's like, we're here. I'm like, this can't be it.
This cannot be it.
I don't believe you. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's like Truman's World. There's something beyond.
Something is wrong with this entire situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And never mind the cold and all that. But yeah, so culturally, I always felt separated and apart. And I don't really know if that's actually diminished now. I'm just kind of, at some point, you're just okay with it. And you're like, whatever.
Yeah. Right.
And
because when you went to Germany, I'm sure you were also like.
That was the same thing.
Same thing.
In a different
total
way.
Outcast, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I remember, I joke about it, but it's the first year I was in Munich. I didn't have any negative experiences. Everybody was super cool. But I think I saw 5 Asian people in the entire time. And, we would wave to each other. Like, yo, I see
what
you.
Up? I see you. If you need help, here's my number.
And and when you're going through that, you don't really think about it on a day-to-day level. But, in hindsight now, when I think about it, I'm like, damn, that definitely affected who I am as a person and how I do what I do.
Right.
So
let's talk a bit about your somewhat silent business partner, right? Michaela.
Yes.
Michaela what?
Michaela Sachenbacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
You could have just said, I don't want to say her last name. It's cool.
Yeah, it's a nice long one. It's a real German-looking name, yeah.
So you met in college. Did the inkling of ACRONYM even start in college?
No.
When did it begin?
No, not as a brand or as a thing. What did happen right away is that we met and realized that we had complementary or contrasting strengths and weaknesses. So whatever she was good at, I was bad at, and vice versa. And so we started doing each other's assignments. So I don't know if you know about like fashion design school. It's like med school. It's no sleep, working all the time, never enough hours in the day. And it's just super hardcore, which I think most people don't really understand. But so you're just trying to survive the the process. Yep. And so we specialized super quickly. Like, all right, I'll draw this. And you do that.
What was the pros and the cons of both of you?
She's extremely organized. We used to joke it's like chaos and order. Like, I was definitely chaos. And she was always on time. Like, and could calculate the time it would take to get from point A to point B, a 10-second window.
Yeah.
And
German
I'd be like,
engineering.
Yeah,
She's
exactly. Yeah. And I'd be like, oh, that was today?
Right.
I thought that was like last week or whatever. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah. So when did the idea of ACRONYM begin?
Much later. So we went through school. We left to Germany. And then there, unfortunately, the job situation was the same. Yeah. Recession had just hit. And I couldn't apply for jobs because I didn't speak the language. Michaela applied to, everything. And eventually decided, you know what? I'm going to go back to school and study Japanese.
You or her?
Her.
Okay.
Yeah. So then she went and studied Japanese and actually left and lived in Kyoto for a year, half a year? I don't know. Ages. Like a long time. And left me in Munich. And I was living in her family's home, and they were super cool. But that's how I learned German, because her grandmother used to live on the floor below us and didn't speak any English at all, and would just talk to me all the time in German. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have learned German, no chance, because everybody wants to try out their English on you in Germany. That's the thing. And then after she came back, while she was away, I'd gotten a couple of freelance jobs doing sportswear stuff, like active sportswear, so snowboarding. Not really good jobs, but it was like I was also just sort of amazed, like, wow, someone's going to pay me to design something. And I think I designed the first collection for this company in Germany for like 5,000 marks, like, which is, I don't know, it's probably like $3,000.
Which is amazing for you back then, right?
I was amazed. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, I kept waiting for them to like realize what they were doing and like kick me out. but that was the beginning, and it was just, obviously you're just trying to survive and you're super hungry. So I remember they had 2 different brands that they were doing, and I was designing one, and then I was like, I bet if I just really kind of showed up all the time and started designing the other one, they wouldn't really figure it out until it was too late. And I was the designer for both of them. And that's what happened. Okay. And then at that time, Michaela came back, and I was like, look, I've got these guys where I want them. They don't know that I'm going to take over. And then we founded the company, but strictly as a design agency, which we then did for about 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And at that point, we were just like, it was still the same thing. It was just like trying to get groceries and trying to pay rent. And like, so we would design anything. So like clubwear, girls' bathing suit line, like inline skate collection, mountain biking. Like, it didn't matter. Like anything you wanted, we would do it.
Right.
And fast, and it was just, that was the deal.
Yeah.
So,
and that was called ACRONYM.
Nope. That was a different just design agency, like just a partnership between the two of us. And, the purpose of the name was really just to have somebody write an invoice. So there was we didn't think about it as a brand even.
Yeah. Just a company.
It was a company.
Right.
And
which came first for you? Like, was it, you said you were designing sort of like snowboard active sportswear.
Yep.
Was it your expertise in that, or were you just like an open designer and that was the client that just happened to call? So like you sort of got into that world?
It was sort of half and half because of my upbringing, I guess, as I said, with the architecture background from my parents. I'd always been interested in, modernist design principles and the whole idea of form follows function and less is more. All that stuff was kind of like in my vocabulary the whole time. So I was always interested in the performance aspects of things and the functional aspects in addition to the aesthetics. So that had always been around. And when I saw this one German label, their stuff in a department store in Germany, the label was called Protective back in the day. They had some interesting details. They had like Kevlar elbow patches and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
And then one of Michaela's cousins somehow found out the number of the company and figured out that this company was actually in Munich. And I just called him. I was like, yo.
You need help. I don't speak German.
I don't speak German. And funny enough, I'm pretty sure I just got the job because I spoke English.
Oh, okay.
And they were like trying to, snowboarding at the time was like most innovative sports disciplines was heavily influenced from America. It came from America. So to them, it was like, oh, this kid's closer to America than we are.
Yeah.
I mean, not at all, right? But so they hired me, and to do. I think we were doing mostly graphics at the beginning, even just like tags and like stupid logos. And thank God though, because that was like the first chance we'd ever gotten to do any kind of creative work for money.
Yeah,
and really just by sheer willpower, sort of absorbed all of the stuff. But and then during that time, that's when we learned how to build outerwear and how to build a layering system and all of that stuff.
Yeah. And getting paid to do it at the same time, right?
Yeah, which was huge.
Right.
And it was the beginning of the industry wave hadn't really kicked off at that point. It was just sort of the beginning of it, at least in Europe.
Yeah, what year is this about?
This is like 93, 90, this is 94, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we did snowboarding stuff I think we ended up working with Burton Snowboards for 13 years in the end of it. But in the German market, with all the various companies, we worked many, many years, all different types of brands, all different price points.
Yeah.
And really got a super hardcore education in outerwear design. And also met the people from Gore-Tex.
Okay. Through these clients.
Through Protective in
cool.
also probably around 95. And learned how to do that.
Yeah.
And we were the only ones, I remember that meeting still, because everybody was complaining about what a pain in the ass it was to work with Gore-Tex and how we couldn't do this and couldn't do that and can't have an exposed zipper, can't.
Yeah.
And we were the only ones who were like, okay, but why? And I was genuinely interested in like, where did all these rules come from and what do they do? And that turned out to be, in the long term, the thing that separated us from other designers. And I think that's also because of the architecture background of my father and mother, because we saw that as an intrinsic part of it rather than just something like to get around.
Yeah, like an obstacle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is actually the heart of it.
Right.
And
Gore-Tex probably appreciated that
as
well.
I mean, they're just so used to, people trying to ignore what they tell them. And so that worked to our advantage in the long run.
Yeah.
Although it is hard the first time you're confronted with those types of restraints as a designer.
Right.
It's almost contrary to the type of education that fashion designers get, which has also become an advantage for us because nobody else can do it.
Yeah, right.
Which is changing now, 20 years later.
Yeah. So back then in like the mid-90s, who were you inspired by from fashion at that point? Like I'm trying to give the listeners sort of like a lay of the land in global fashion design. Like what were you into? What were you looking up to?
So streetwear didn't really exist at that time. It was like there was jeanswear, there was high fashion. There was no internet, so it was all magazines.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happened while I was in Canada that had a huge influence was our school, together with Ryerson, together with which is now called OCAD, OCAD, Ontario College of Art and Design. They did a joint trip to Japan, Hong Kong, and Bangkok.
Okay.
And I somehow managed to scrape enough money together to go on that trip. And after the trip, managed to stay with a guy named Pak Kwan, who lived in Tokyo, who was an intern for my dad at his company back in the day. And I was like, Pak, I don't know if you remember me when I was a little kid. I used to, take all the paper made and make graffiti all over your desk, and I'm coming to Japan, and can I stay at your place? And he was like, sure. And then he's like, how long? I'm like, 6 weeks. And he was like, okay, to his credit. And so I ended up staying in Japan with Michaela, both of us actually, for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Which completely blew our minds.
Yeah.
Obviously. That is 1991.
Oh, really early.
Yeah, 1991. And again, students, no money. And, coming from Canada and going to Tokyo at that time, I felt like I came from a third world country. I was like, what is going on? Like, how is this happening? And so I bought a notebook and would just go around everywhere and like write lists of things I saw. Yeah. And like draw some stuff, couldn't buy anything, but conversely could just be like in a Japanese grocery store for an hour and a half looking at packaging because it was just like, wow. Yeah. And so that happened. Then we went back again in 1995 around and I didn't actually, I'm trying to think of the first time I actually saw like the Harajuku stuff. I think the first time Bathing Ape would have popped up on my radar. Oh, you know what it was? It was the kid who founded Royal Elastics. this guy Tull Price.
Yep.
He had a Bathing Ape jacket on that he'd gotten in Tokyo. That I was like, what's that? You know, and then
how did you know Tull Price?
I met him at where the fuck did I meet? I met him at the Interjeans trade show in Cologne, in Germany. Wow, this is so far. This is so far. And I was wearing orange and gray. What was it? The Terra Humara. Yeah. And he was like, "Yo, where did you get those shoes?" And then we started talking. Yeah. And then
he now does the brand Fight, F-E-I-T.
Yes, there's a little story with that as well, because we actually came up with the name and the design and the entire for Fight. Yeah, and we're never paid. and I always think I'm going to run into Tull somewhere on the street and have a word with him about that.
You have the invoice in your back pocket ready to serve?
Something to that effect. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, that's, you know. And then we went back. I can't remember if it was the trip we did in 95 or shortly after that. But yeah, going to the first, you know,
streetwear,
yes, scene. That thing happening and seeing like double tabs and neighborhood and you know, waiting in line to get into the Babe store. Yeah. When it was, you know, downstairs, you know, talking about the spot, and like them only letting in, you know, 5 people at once, and everybody, no one talking, and you know, everybody quickly acquiring things and leaving, and that whole experience of like, this is more like a museum or a club visit, or
what do you think it was about streetwear that like you sort of were enamored with?
It also wasn't really called streetwear back then. I don't think it was just it wasn't.
But it also wasn't like what you were into, which is like form follows function and technical.
That's true. That's true. I think I just got the references, you know, because it was like, I remember standing in line to get into Bape, and there was the little LCD TV above the kind of entranceway, and there were clips edited together from Tron and like, you know, Planet of the Apes and whatever. And I was like, whoa, this is dope,
Warriors,
right? Like, all that stuff, right? And the other stuff that I was into was like, you know, 80s design, like so Com and Yoji, in particular, Yoji. Yeah. And so the first like designer thing I bought was a Yoji Yamamoto trench coat. Wow. And that would have been 95 too, I think.
You're right. It's all about the references, right? They just, their references were all on point.
It's a generational thing, I think.
Yeah. And but also having the wherewithal to put them into a new creation. Like it's like a remix of it. You know?
Really well.
Yeah.
I mean, really well. Like,
right. Not cheesy, not like merchy. Like,
incredible.
Right.
Like the, I mean, the interior of the Bape store back then already was incredible.
Like years ahead of anything
the way the T-shirts were displayed, you know. With the
shopping bag, a little sticker on top
all
and stuff.
Everything, right? So those guys were, I don't think people realize that the world of streetwear as we understand it now, even the idea of a collaboration, that all started there. You know, we talked about this a little bit at
HYPEBEAST.
At HYPEBEAST. Yeah. But I mean, it was done there for the first time.
Yeah. We were talking that like a collaboration wasn't 2 people calling each other and saying, let's do a collaboration.
No.
Right. It wasn't that.
It must have been, I mean, I wasn't there, but it must have been just organic. I mean, all those guys, they knew each other from skateboarding, and they knew each other from,
DJing
they were friends.
And stuff.
And they were in the same school or whatever. Right. And so it must have been very organic. Yeah. But it was still like a trip, you know, the first time as an outsider to see 2 logos on the same product.
Yeah.
Back then, you're like, what is going on? Right. It was like,
wait, what was the other name for it? It wasn't collaboration. It was like
double label.
Double label.
Label.
Yeah. Literally 2 labels on one outfit.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. Double label. Yeah. So before collab. Right. Yeah, that's true.
Hiroshi was talking about at HYPEBEAST the story of how he, quote unquote, collaborated with Porter Bags. Yes. Because he wanted a DJ bag for his records. They didn't make one. So he was like, can you make me a DJ bag?
Yes.
But it wasn't like, let's do a collab. It was like,
I mean, Hiroshi's also like, operates on a whole other level than everyone else with that, as far as I'm concerned, because that, you know, he says it sounds so simple, but it turned into Head Porter, which is a brand, right? It's a distinct own, you know, shop
subdivision,
and has its own history of products now. So
yeah, right. Okay, so you've got a fairly, would you say the design studio with Michaela was like successful?
Yeah, I mean,
Like the two of you made a living from this?
Yeah.
With no other form of income?
Yes, we could survive doing design. So in that respect, yes, it was successful.
Is survive the operative word here, or was it like you guys were doing really well?
I wouldn't say we were doing really well I do remember one year when our accountant was like, okay, so you should buy a car. And we're like, what do you mean? It's like, well, either you're going to give the money to the government or you can buy something
big.
You know?
Yeah.
And that was the first time, the whole time we've just been, I was excited to just like have 2 cups of hot chocolate in the morning instead of 1.
Yeah. All right, that was balling.
I was psyched.
I remember when in Staple I got to a point where my accountant at the end of the year was like, do you need any like big equipment thing? I was like, why?
Exactly.
I was like, he's like, like a big color laser printer. I was like, why? He's like, because you should buy that. I was like,
what do you mean?
Yeah, really? Nice.
Yeah. I think when you're a young company and you're new to the business, any business probably, you're just so busy actually trying to do the thing. For us, it was just hard to like keep track of like, it wasn't a strategic plan. It was just like the hustle, the grind. You're just like every day, like, okay.
Do work, bill, get paid. Do work, bill, get paid.
Make the deadline.
Yeah.
Hand in the stuff.
Right.
And
So when did you and Michaela finally sit down? Do you remember the moment where you're like, let's do our own thing?
That happened also quite organically because, so we'd been working in let's just call it the active sportswear industry for a while. And we had done everything, like I said, mountaineering stuff, mountain biking, inline skating, whatever, snowboarding.
Yeah.
And had been exposed to all of these technologies and all of the ideas that go into layering and all of the, outerwear systems. And like, oh, well, why can't we have this every day? And proposed it to the people we were working with, different companies that we were collaborating with on stuff at the time. And they all said no. And they were like,
when you say have it every day, you mean like a more like a streetwear version using all this stuff? Is that what you mean by having it every day?
Yeah, not even streetwear, just like a everyday wearable, like, so you don't look like you came off the mountain, but you're still not going to get wet.
Yeah.
That very simple
functionality,
utilitarian idea. But also an aesthetic idea. It's also an aesthetic idea. Because you could just buy the North Face jacket and
wear it, which is what people were doing.
Yeah.
But why do you think they said no?
Well, they were very clear about that. It's like, it's too difficult, it's too expensive, no one's going to care. Right? So those were the 3 things we heard from, I think we proposed it probably to 4 people. And then kind of out of frustration at the end of the day, we're like, all right, well, let's just do it ourselves. Which I also remember telling people the idea and that we were going to do it. And they're like, kind of looked at us like, okay.
Right. Good luck with that one, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And they were right. they were all right. It was unbelievably difficult.
Yeah.
And
Is it because of the amount of effort and like investment that goes into making it? It's just makes it too expensive? Because ACRONYM is extremely expensive for everyday wear.
Yep. I wouldn't call it everyday wear. No, it's not everyday wear. So the thing that happened then is, you have to imagine that we're designing like at the peak of it in one season, the record was 7 different snowboard collections.
For different companies?
For different companies.
Damn,
in the same season. So like there was this big catalog that would come out called Sportscheck, which is like a mail order catalog in Germany. And they had a snowboarding section that was like, I don't know, it was like 15, 18 pages long.
Yeah.
I remember one year, 7 of the pages were our designs.
Wow.
But from all different brands.
Yeah.
And nobody knew.
Yeah, right? You're like the village whore.
Pretty much. And, so.
Sleeping around.
We would just do, like I said, we would do whatever.
Yeah.
And we didn't sign any, everybody wanted us to be exclusive. And we're like, fine, buy us out of this other thing that we're doing.
Yeah.
And then the discussion ended. So, so we designed tons of stuff for other people. And, there were different ways companies went about that. Burton was interesting at the beginning because they had just seen our stuff at ISPO, one of the big trade shows, and I randomly bumped into them at some other booth and started talking, and it turned out to be Heidi Tappen, who was the director of apparel, which I didn't know, and then got a message from her, did I get a fax or an email? I can't remember. It's like a long time ago. I'm trying to date that.
Yeah.
But and then we would just do they would just pay us a flat rate for a bunch of designs that we would draw by hand and put into a binder and put into a FedEx box and just FedEx off to them.
Yeah.
And then...
so this was, I think, would you call it a retained client?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like they paid you a set fee every month.
No, they just paid us one shot per season. Like
Okay.
one, yeah.
And you just submit a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, we had like an outline, like whatever, 35 pieces of outerwear.
Yeah.
Like 20 pants, blah, blah, blah. And we would just design it completely in the dark, no contact with them at all. And then you'd go to the trade show 8 months later, a year later, and see what made it into the line.
Damn.
And a few times in a row, we had done key things. So, and they became bestsellers. And then I would walk around and see stuff that we'd done in our basement all over the world, which was crazy. And then we were the first external design team that they had worked with at the time. And then by the time we left, many, many years later, there was no internal designers, and there were, I think, 7 or 8 different groups working on stuff for them. So it became like a whole, methodology that they had.
Yep. It was like collaboration, but without any of the parties meeting.
Yeah, kind of thing. Yeah.
Like
And
we were doing, Staple Design was doing graphics.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your stuff and my stuff, we have collaborated on things unknowingly.
Without us knowing, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
when you were doing Burton, were you like sort of winding down some of the other like regional clients?
eventually,
Because you ended up doing like a lot of stuff with Burton.
I think Burton ended up being the longest term collection. So well into the years when we were still doing ACRONYM, when we had already started ACRONYM, we were still doing Burton.
Yeah.
And
You did some analog stuff, right?
we did
Ronin,
everything. We did analog.
AK.
We did, the kids collection, Backhill. We did
Ooh,
we did
I remember
everything.
that Backhill,
We
yeah.
did everything. I think we did the first women's specific AK jacket. Actually, yeah. Where we were like, you know what? It shouldn't be the same thing as the men's jacket. Let's do like a specific design for the girls. That we also did that. It was like, so we did everything, like tons of stuff. Yeah.
So do you remember the first ACRONYM piece?
Yeah.
What was it?
It's the jacket called the 2371, which in its second iteration became called the J1A.
Okay.
And it's still the best-selling jacket that we make, actually.
Wow.
Funny enough. Along with the first thing we did that came out in 2002 was called Kit 1. And again, because we had no money, we couldn't do a collection. We're like, okay, well, let's put all of the ideas for an entire collection into one thing. And the idea we came up with was this box set called Kit 1.
Yeah.
And it was like a
Was
jacket.
this the folding
Yes,
box?
exactly.
It was like a paper box type thing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it was a cardboard
thick,
box with like a slider that came out like a book.
Yeah.
And then you open the book, and there was mounted onto it was elastics. There was a jacket and a bag, and 2 CDs. One was music, and one was computer software, and then two manuals basically. And that was the first ACRONYM product.
That was the whole collection.
That was the whole thing. That's all they took everything we had.
Yeah.
And almost killed us.
Did you do it in multiple colors?
We had 2 colors.
Black and white?
Yeah. Night Ops and Snow Ops.
Yeah.
The colors
Yeah.
we called it.
I remember seeing that at Stash's store.
Yes.
Wait, which store? Was it
In Recon?
It was
Yeah.
Recon on Eldridge Street in the Lower East Side or
Yes.
something.
Yeah.
He had it in there
Yep.
like on display. I remember
Exactly.
seeing it.
Yeah. He bought it. Hectic bought it in Tokyo and Hideout in London. And
Do you remember the price of it?
I just wrote a tweet about this yesterday. 1250 euros wholesale.
Yeah.
So
ridiculous.
It was already. And it was 2002, right?
Yeah.
It was like
right. It's probably 5K with inflation today.
Yeah. It was a ridiculous amount of money.
How many kits did you make?
We made basically 100. I think 120 maybe. And I don't think we sold them all.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we still have probably 40 of them at least.
Really?
Yep.
They'll sell now.
But they're not assembled. That was the other thing. So we went all out, right, on the design of everything. Out of frustration with all of our freelance gigs where design, that was the other thing I realized with the freelancing is that the design, just no one cares. In most companies, no one cares about design. They just care about the sales. And you have no power as a designer.
Yeah.
Right? So ACRONYM was our response to that situation. And we're like, all right, design first. We're not even going to care about the sales or like what it costs. Like that's just not even going to be part of the equation.
Interesting.
And it still isn't.
Yeah.
And
so it's pure design without compromising of like market or sales.
Yeah, we didn't think about there's no end user in mind. There's no like study, no business guys staying there going, oh, this is a good idea, right?
Yeah.
We still don't have a sales manager, like to this day, which I'm not sure is a good thing, but it is what it is. And so as a reaction to that, we just decided to make what is the best possible thing we can make and imagine, and let's do that. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
And we started the company in 1999, or founded the company in 1999. Probably started working on stuff that year, the year before even, and took until 2002 to bring out the first thing.
Wow. So 3 years to make that first kit.
Yep.
Damn.
Like close to 20 prototypes.
Right.
Like, and
you said that jacket still evolved, but it exists today.
Yes, it exists today in a modified form, which actually looks closer to the previous, the version that came out in Kit 1 was maybe like the 5th version of the jacket. And the one that people know today as J1A GT is actually the 4th version.
Okay.
And we couldn't get the venting to be waterproof, so we took it out. And then the J1A then came out in 2003-04 as part of a little capsule collection, but not in Gore-Tex. So then we didn't have to worry about the venting. And then it only came out in Gore-Tex again in 2015 as J1A GT, which kind of closed the circle.
Yeah.
And by that time we knew how to make the whole thing work the way we wanted to in the beginning.
Yeah,
So,
the whole acronym line to me, and I've been sort of following it since its inception, since that kit. Like, it's not really based on released product drop collections. It's more like an experimental evolution of tweaking, right?
Yeah,
so like,
absolutely.
Yeah. Like you sort of have like, if you're a collector of it, you have like version 1.0, and then this is the slightly tweaked version of it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like the collections, we drop so-called seasons because that's how the industry works, right? So you want to interface with the industry in some way. You have to, that's how the buying works. That's how
the scheduling of it works.
Yeah. That's even how the supply side works, because all of the fabric deliveries, everything, you don't have a choice. You're kind of locked into that to some degree. So we do have these seasonal releases, but it's more like this is what we're working on and this is what's ready now when this season comes out. It's not
immediately.
Yeah. It's not like, oh, we're going to plan the season. There's going to be 6 tops and 3 bottoms and blah, 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 and they're going to work together. It's more like, these are all the things we're working on now. This is the date and time, and here we go. Yeah.
It's more like baking.
I guess.
We're baking, and it's out of the oven now.
Ding.
Here.
Ding.
Here.
Yeah. Except that you know that the ding is going to come in January.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and do you ever feel like you, looking back on it, are you happy with the way that you like sort of did this business, or do you feel like maybe you should have maybe done it like a more traditional way? Well,
I hope that there's a way that's easier.
Yeah.
But I know that there's no other way we could have done it because we tried every other way and none of them worked. So
is it because of what goes into it?
It's because of what goes into it and the combination of what goes into it and how hard it is to make and the resources that we had at hand, which were almost none.
Right.
So those two things together, that's it. Yeah. There's no other way to do it.
Like if a kid was like, I want to start a brand like ACRONYM, what would you tell him today?
Think about it very carefully. I would be like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's, I mean, there's now, especially with like the last couple of years, where a lot of our work has been, I guess, legitimized by the direction the industry has taken. The style of, the kids call it tech wear, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a thing, right?
Yeah. That you are a pioneer of.
Kind of, yeah. And inadvertently. Like, it was never our intent to, I guess the problem I have with the word tech wear is that it's, I just don't think it's a very good description of how we look at our work anyway. So now you can legitimately start a brand. So I'm going to make a techwear brand.
Yeah.
And people will know what you're talking about.
Because there's a category
Yeah,
and there's
exactly.
stores that have techwear sections
Exactly.
and stuff. Yeah.
And then about the definition of what it actually is, I'm sure there's plenty of definitions that you can Google or watch a YouTube tutorial about. But none of those things probably are how we think about what we do. So, and the way we do what we do is extremely specific, and it's difficult, and it's expensive, and it's, it's
Laborious.
also, it's not, and it's not something where like I said, there's no account manager going, oh, this is a great idea. It's kind of insane, actually. So it's not like, if you're going to start a brand like that, then I'm like, yeah, be careful, right? Like, what are you really getting into? But if you want to start like, a cool line of techwear bags and, like whatever, go for it.
Yeah.
It's like.
Did direct to consumer sales help you at all? Like, because you started ACRONYM pre-internet sales.
Yeah. I think ACRONYM would have been a lot better had we started it, let's say, 5 to 6 years after the fact, after we did. But yeah, there was no e-commerce when we started. So the only chance you had was to wholesale to shops. And
the few shops in the world that would understand and accept your crazy terms.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it didn't begin like that. So it began much more liberally, where we were like, okay, please buy this stuff. And we did.
Whoever, please.
We traveled around and like, I had a suitcase of samples and I'd show up and do the demo and be like,
right.
And then they see the price and be like, what?
Yeah. That's what I mean by crazy terms.
And
like,
that was it.
And also
yeah.
It's not 6 months later. It's like, no, just buy this right now. Like,
no, it was 6 months or a year later.
Oh, you had a pre-buy.
Yeah, it was a pre-sale, pre-order. Again, because we didn't have the money to finance the stock.
Yeah.
So,
so it was all like you got sort of deposits before you even went into production?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's been so that has been the same since the beginning. And that was the same thing where we're like, is this going to work? Because who's going to actually believe us, or who's going to do this? There's no, you know. But luckily, we had met a few people, and particularly through the work we did with Burden, we met Stash. Stash introduced us to Yopi.
Yopi's from Hectic.
Yopi's from Hectic, and I don't remember who introduced us to Fraser. But yeah, all those guys.
You said Hideout, right?
Yeah, Hideout.
Wasn't Fraser?
Fraser was a manager of Hideout.
Yeah.
This is before he was at Nike. And then Luca from Slam Jam, and then Sarah from Colette. All those people sort of heard about it
domino
eventually.
effect.
Word of mouth. Yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, it sounds kind of amazing now when you think about it, but there really was no other way to do it.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't set up an Instagram account or put it on Tumblr. Nothing was there.
Yeah.
So,
how about today? Is more of your sales direct now, or is it more still wholesale?
I would say now with our own online shop, it's probably 50-50 now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then how about the design studio business, like consulting business versus the brand? Like, what's the ratio there now?
That is a good question, actually.
I'm glad you don't know the answer off the top of your head.
Yeah, I don't actually know. I'm
be?
guessing it's also around 50-50. Yeah.
I picture Michaela right now, like shaking her head. Like, no, it's not, you idiot.
This is probably true. She actually is just trying to call me now. Tell me that, probably.
So, yeah, you would guess it's about 50-50.
Yeah, I guess it's about 50-50.
Okay.
There's the design studio in Berlin is also evolved very organically.
I wanted to get into that now. Because it's much more selective now. You don't work with every single sportswear snowboard brand in Europe anymore. Like,
no,
super selective now. So what's the client base look like for the design studio?
It's very small. We much prefer to have long-term, deep partnerships. So like with Stone Island Shadow Project we just had the 10-year event in Los Angeles last week.
Yeah.
So it's 20 collections, right?
Yeah.
21 collections.
With Stone, that's sick.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Nike too. I think we're up to 5 years probably by now. So after we, I guess it's about the same time. probably around the same season, our accountant said, you should buy a car. Right around that time, I would have burnt out and just been like, you know what? I actually hate this. I hate dealing with all of these, all these different collections and companies and random requests from sales managers who are going to try and tell you that this is a good idea for a hooded sweatshirt or whatever.
And like 7 different companies. Like,
And at that point, I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. We had been also turned down ACRONYM as a project had been turned down by all of these different people as well at the time. So there was a kind of a real big air of frustration at the moment.
Right.
So, and then from one season to the next, basically we halved our income and
because you
kicked out
fired clients.
Yeah, exactly. We fired a bunch of clients and started concentrating on ACRONYM. Took time away and like, all right, we're not going to get paid for this time. We're just going to think about what we really want to do and what do we actually stand behind and believe in.
That's a really tough decision, though. To like,
it wasn't
get rid of money. No,
yeah, it wasn't because it was just like I hate this. I just don't care.
Yeah,
I'm not into it. And so that's what happened. And since then, we've said no all the time.
Yeah,
like so, I don't know what it is. Probably 30, 40 to 1. Like. Projects that we say no to versus projects we say yes to.
Right.
And now it's even also more just because of time, because we just don't have the time. So even if there's stuff that we really want to do, like we don't do very many collaborations just because we just can't fit it into our schedule.
Yeah.
And people are like, they love what we do and that's fantastic, but it's very rare that somebody understands the amount of commitment it takes to do what we do. So it's like, can you do this for us? I'm like, yes, I can, but fasten your seatbelt because it's not going to be a smooth ride. Like it's difficult. It's time consuming. There's no shortcuts. And so yeah, we don't actually do. We do much less work, with much fewer partners, but then much deeper.
Yeah. It's a bit like asking an artist to commission a painting, where like there's no shortcuts.
Yeah,
like you just need me to paint this. It's going to take 2 years for me to finish this.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Right, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So right now it's Stone, it's Nike, and it's ACRONYM.
Stone, Nike, and ACRONYM, and then we also have a sort of ongoing dialogue with RoboRace. Yeah, which the second project came out with them just now at HYPEBEAST.
Yeah. Which is automated driving.
Yeah, which is which is a robotic racing platform. It's a technology platform. And that's interesting because there's no specific brief. Most of the work we do is very much like, here's a problem to solve it with us. And this one is more, we really think it's interesting what you're doing. I think it's interesting what they're doing. Let's just hang out a lot and try things.
Are you making apparel for them? Is it clothing based?
We just did a little, merch based collection now for HYPEBEAST, and it's not that direct. No, it's much more like it's super organic. I guess because the owner of the company was a fan of our design work, and then he knew one of my old childhood friends, Rod Chong, who's now become the deputy CEO of RoboRace. And so because of that connection, there's no trust barriers. It's just more like, oh, let's hang out and do cool things.
Yeah.
And so, for example, when HYPEBEAST approached us and asked us, like, would you like to take part in HYPEFest? I was like, there's no way. We're just too small. We don't have the bandwidth. We don't have a team we can put on that, right?
Yeah.
So there's no. I was like, sorry, can't do it. But then a week later, I was like talking to Rod, and I was like, you know what? Maybe this is good for you guys. And then
and a way for you to be part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they ended up handling all of the traffic control, and we contributed, the aesthetics and the visuals and whatever we could.
Yeah.
And that worked out great. So, so it's like that. It's not even like, here's the season or here's the project and here's the deadline. It's more like,
ongoing sort of a partnership.
Yeah.
Do you ever think back to that day where you sort of like got rid of most or all of your clients and think about a time where, like, what if I just kept going with that? Like, what if today, what if ACRONYM was like 23 clients and like
it was a
global
decision.
offices?
Yeah, it was a decision because we could have become an agency. Like we were an agency. We could have become a full-blown agency, much more in the way that like an ad agency works, where you have like accounts and account managers and teams dedicated to them. And that was definitely within the realm of possibility. But I just didn't want to be a manager.
Yeah, I wanted to keep actually making the stuff.
I wanted to be a designer.
Yeah.
And realized very early on that as long as we were a service provider, we would not get to have control.
Yeah.
No one's going to give it to you.
Right.
And that's just how it is.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
Yeah.
So working with Stone Island and Nike as two of your main brands is probably to most people listening to this, like they cut off a limb to be able to work with those two particular brands. Especially like, you know, I think when you started with Stone 10 years ago, it wasn't what it was today. Like Stone, from a cultural level, blew up in like the last couple of years, where it's become like full on just a staple fashion piece, right?
Yep.
So now you're working with these two brands and you collaborate with them, you know, on an ongoing basis. Talk about how these two brands, who are both at the top of their game respectively, but so different, like in terms of their roots and DNA, how do you sort of like switch back and forth in those brains between working with those two? Or are they the same in many ways, or are they very, very different?
So the way we approach client work is one of the analogies we use is the client is the director and we're the actor.
Okay.
But the narrative is the narrative that dictates everything. So what is the brand trying to say and what do we need to achieve comes first. So, but as the actor in the picture, we're going to use all of our abilities and talents to manifest the director's vision. So it doesn't mean, obviously we have a style because we're people and you're going to have a style. But I mean, it's easier if you look at the technical aspect. So if I'm doing a layering system for Stone Island, I'm not just going to use the layering system from ACRONYM. I'm going to try and make a new one that's specific to Stone Island that highlights the advantages Stone Island has versus the advantages ACRONYM has. Same thing when I do, that's also with the hood or like any of the technical details on ACG. We will develop specifically for ACG in an attempt to express what ACG is.
Yeah.
And because of that process, and also because each company is different and they do have inherent advantages and disadvantages or capabilities, it becomes quite natural, actually. Once you get over the idea of like a designer is just about a style, if you follow that process, you will end up with very different products.
What's the biggest difference in the, you know, using your film analogy, like between the director of Nike and Stone?
I mean, they're completely different operations. So it's like comparing, you know, Kubrick to Ridley Scott. They're going to take the same script and make two totally different movies. Yeah. Right. So, the things we do for Stone Island, you can't do anywhere else. We can't take those ideas and execute them in ACRONYM because we don't have the structure. We don't have the know-how or the people. And the things we do for Nike, we can't do them at Stone Island either, you couldn't do them anywhere else. You can only do them at Nike. Right. And that's, for us at least, when we think we've done the right thing, is when we end up with those unique propositions. Yeah.
Right. When you did the, let's recount some of the amazing footwear projects that you did with Nike. So there was the first one was the Lunar Air Force One, right?
Yep, the Lunar Force One.
With the sort of dipped back.
Yep.
So talk through how that happens. You have ACRONYM, right? Yeah. And then like they're like, "Do you want to do an Air Force One? Is that it?"
Yeah, exactly. You get an email in your inbox, and then you just send a design sheet. You just send a spec sheet and a technical drawing. No, that it's all people. All business is people. Yeah. So it's we had known Fraser from before he went to Nike. I met Mark Parker at the Worldwide Bear Brick Tour dinner. Must have been 2003 or 4. And had met Fraser before he went to Nike. And then I think it was during his first year there too. He also brought us over to campus. And we did like a whole day tour and met a ton of people. Somebody, funny enough, had actually bought one of the kits and had it at the company. So we were on their radar already.
Yeah.
And then it took basically 10 years to actually start working together.
Yeah, when people ask, how do collabs happen? Yeah,
like
10 years. Just wait.
It's all organic. It's just not very fast.
Right.
So it's not like today where, it's just everything's faster these days, right?
Yeah.
It's all established kind of patterns, and it just wasn't like that before.
Yeah, there was no blueprint for it before.
There was no blueprint. And,
Yeah.
And then Fraser and I had tried a few different approaches of things we could do together, and a lot of them fell through for various reasons. It's Nike is obviously a rather large organization, so
with lots of different priorities,
lots
right?
of moving parts.
Yeah,
and the Lunar Force One thing came up, and it just seemed like from Nike's side they were like, "Oh, this could fit," and from our side we were like, "Yeah, let's give it a shot." So went into it very not with a lot of expectations, just like very organically and exploratory from both sides. It wasn't like, "Oh, we're going to sell hundreds of thousand pairs of shoes with this." It was just like, "Oh, let's just see what happens." So yeah. And the Lunar Force was actually, I think, the second shoe that was designed. We decided to do both the Lunar Force and the Downtown at the same time. And from the design process, they both started at the same time. But I think we hit the design of the Downtown first.
You mean the one with the zipper on the top?
No, that's the Lunar Force. I mean the one with the like the boot cuff, like the with the soft shell cuff, the high.
Okay.
That came out after the Presto. Actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So design-wise, I think that was actually the first one. And but the Lunar Force was sort of, I guess, the clearest illustration of the design intent that we had.
Yeah.
Which was just to treat the shoe as a blank canvas and to interrupt it with these sort of foreign elements, rather than trying to make a harmonious design. We sort of did this deconstructivist thing, which was a first, I think, for Nike footwear, and caused a lot of debate, actually.
Yeah, because that's
it was a pretty violent.
It's a holy grail of a shoe that you like sliced into.
Yeah, and literally sliced into it, like got the samples and pulled out the scissors and like actually did it. But at that point, we discussed it a lot, and we were like, all right, well, we don't have a personal story that we can relate to, and because no one in the studio had actually even worn them as a sneaker.
Yeah.
Right? So it didn't have like a cultural connection to it that we could fall back on and legitimize, like, oh, this is what we did because back in the day.
No, there was
none of that.
Yeah.
No, back in the day. And then we thought, well, it's such an iconic thing. Everyone throws that word around, but this really is.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, if we're going to go for it, we have to be super confident about what we're doing and just go for it. So we did.
Yeah.
And
make something that now you will wear, you and your team will wear.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it did its job because it took that sneaker to a different place. And I think already within the company, when the first prototypes started to come back, so years before the shoe actually came out, the shoe, the resonance that shoe, both of those shoes had within Nike, could be felt. And I was constantly getting calls and meeting people at Nike who were like, "Whoa, we saw your shoes, and holy cow!"
Right.
So there was definitely ripples from that, and I think also in footwear design, I think it just showed them a different way of looking at the sort of pool of history that they have, and another way to interpret it, not to be so. I mean, we are super respectful of it. That's the thing. So, but not to be so careful with it, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
So
you mentioned this before about like the polarization opinion of it, right?
Yeah.
I think actually your brand, out of most, is like you have fans that are sort of like so diehard that they're buying like doubles and triples of stuff to stock.
Yes.
And then there's the other side, which is the people who just hate everything that you do and all the videos and all the demonstration, and they just think it's like complete lunacy, right?
Yep. That's a good way to describe
There's
it.
there's kind of no
There's no middle ground.
there's no middle ground. Yeah,
No.
yeah.
No.
But is that what you're going for? Like,
No. It's not like part of the plan or anything. No. It's that's an interesting result. But it's fine. It's good. It's like in between. So we did the design agency. We started ACRONYM. We had some great opportunities and really amazing early adopters in the form of, like I said, Hideout, Colette, whatever.
yeah.
And then we had like this sort of like 6-year-long slog where like nothing happened, right? So our early supporters were still supporting, but the stuff was just hanging there. Like nobody cared. You know? And we just kind of insisted and just kept going.
Yeah.
And there were so many years where we were like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Like for this amount of effort, for this amount of units, like it's insane. Right?
Yeah.
And, but we're just stubborn, you know? I don't know how else to describe it. And we just...
Or insane.
Yeah, or both. Yeah. And just decided, you know, like, well, we like it, so we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's not... it's never lost money, but it definitely wasn't making... There was no financial reason to do it by any definition.
Yeah.
So...
But you could argue that like the kit that you did, which winded up being at like Beaverton headquarters, might have been the reason why you got like all these collaborative projects too.
Sure. And just being, and then being stubborn for all that time and not giving up.
Yeah.
I mean, people just start to believe you after a while.
Right.
If you insist hard enough, this is the truth, then it's the truth, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Or like it becomes a valid position.
Yeah.
And I think time also just proved, you know, I always say that you don't really understand what ACRONYM is until you've worn it for like 3-4 months. Then you kind of get it.
Or years even.
Or years even, yeah. And you can, right? You know, we get people sending in jackets and like with, you know, letters of like, help me, I have to have it. I can't live without this jacket. I wear it every day for like the last 7 years.
Yeah.
But now it's finally died because I crashed my bike and whatever. Please, please, please fix it.
Yeah.
And that's great. So,
Right.
And we try to. And so to have opinion of any sort, like people hating it or people loving it or, you know, both as the case is now.
Yeah.
It's great because it's like we were discussing at lunch, you know, it's like hate is not the opposite of love, right? And the opposite of love, in my opinion, is indifference, right? And if you go through a period of indifference, then
That's the worst thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like that's discouraging. You know, that's really discouraging.
Yeah.
But for people to take the time and energy to actually hate on something is
There's some emotional.
there's some emotion that means they connected it to it, you know,
Right.
in a real, undeniable way.
Yeah.
And as much as it's uncomfortable to listen to sometimes, we still try to take up that information, right? Because there are things to learn there.
Yeah.
And sometimes, yeah.
Right.
So
Interesting.
yeah,
You were saying you were talking about John Mayer at lunch, who's one of the biggest
yeah, he was an early
collectors. He's a collector.
Yeah, he's a collector of many things, and he was definitely one of the early adopters,
Yeah.
early adopters of ACRONYM, and has a huge collection of like old stuff that people won't even believe. Like,
Yeah.
And he was one of the first guys, like you said, who was buying 2 or 3 of something. And I asked him, like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. Why is he doing it?
And he's like,
Does he want to make an ACRONYM museum?
probably not. I don't think so. I think he's just, what did he say? He said, he's like, oh, what if I lose one? What if you sell the company? What if you go bankrupt?
Right.
There'll be no more.
Right.
So he's like, I just want to be safe. and he really understood it from day one, and he got it, you know. And yeah, cool.
Okay, so your recent Presto Vapor Max release, right?
Yep.
You called on him, I guess, to do the promotion for it.
Yeah.
And the marketing.
Yeah.
How did that conversation go?
I actually didn't make the call. Fraser made the call. And
It was Fraser's idea to use John in the marketing.
I actually don't know whose idea it was. It all happened so fast and so spontaneously.
Yeah.
Basically, I had gone to Japan, went to Naoshima, got terrible sunburn, went back to Tokyo, was at my girlfriend's place, and like, I can't go inside, I need a hat. And she's like, I only have this cowboy hat.
Okay.
I was like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm going to wear it.
Okay.
Started wearing it around. I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. Somebody at Nike had seen it and was like, what the hell? Hatched this plan for this, which the deck for the proposal basically looks like the campaign 1-to-1. Incredibly well executed.
Yeah.
But around the same time, John had reached out to Nike and was like, yeah, we should maybe do something together this year.
Separately, not
Separately.
Okay.
And Fraser was like, I think I might have something. and then they sent him the deck, and then within 3 weeks, I'm pretty sure, maybe 4, not longer though, it went from the deck to the finished video.
Wow.
So it was like lightning fast.
You went to LA for it or what?
Went to LA to shoot it, shot with Carlos Serrao and his team, and Danny Demers was art director, and they just pulled off this incredible thing, and it was the smoothest shoot I've ever been on.
Yeah.
And everything worked.
Right.
Except for the tumbleweeds that wouldn't tumble. That was the only
Tumble,
hiccup.
damn it, tumble.
Yeah, it was the only hiccup in the entire production. The
But
whole
I guess
thing
it
was
helped
shot
that
in one
John
day.
understood the whole vibe. too.
John understood the vibe better than we did. Like, he showed up. I was talking to him I was texting him in the week before, and he's like, I already know which hat. And I was like, all right, you don't have to show it to me. I trust you. And, and he came, he had his own rack of clothes, and he was his own stylist, right? And
Wow.
pulled out all of this stuff.
So committed.
And was so professional and so on point. He had the right guitar, the right hat, right everything.
Right.
And then we had a great stylist, Meg Kuna, on the shoot as well, who brought amazing stuff to work with, plus all the ACRONYM stuff that we brought. And then it just all came together.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And and then it really hit everyone was when Carlos started doing the portraits of John and I together and separately. Like, wow, this is really going to work. And fantastic to be a part of something like that.
Yeah. How about the recent one where in Shanghai, I think, you had like multiple Errolsons.
The clone army.
The clone army of Errolson, right?
Yeah.
Is that your dream to have like a clone army?
I have thought about it a couple of times.
So they did.
I
Nike does
also
it
get
for it.
I also get a lot of requests to like, can you just clone yourself and like
Yeah.
you can
Get the shit done.
Exactly. Let's do more stuff. That was amazing. It was the same team and same director, same creative, and equally as fun. It was like it just works now. I don't know. It's
Now it's become almost like a storyline, like a movie of its own that could
I
just
said to Danny,
script
I was
itself.
like, I don't know how you're going to follow up the VaporMax thing. Like, whoever has to do this job next is like,
yeah.
for them. But then he had to do it.
Right.
And I was like, But he showed me that I was like, God damn, you actually figured it out.
Yeah.
You actually topped it, and you made it, not topped it, but you extended it and made it, into a bigger story even than it was before. So,
Right.
yeah,
It's pretty dope.
it's pretty fun. Yeah.
So, what do you see for the future of you, the agency, and the brand?
That's really simple and has always been simple. People always ask, what are your goals? And it's always like, we just want to do it again next season. And that's all we really focus on because, making ACRONYM is also not like making other stuff because it's legitimately hard to make.
Yeah.
And there are challenges the entire way. And obviously we keep getting more ambitious in what we're trying to do. And our factory gets better and better at making things, but we're always on the edge. Like, can we actually produce this? Will it work? And when you're doing that, that takes up so much of our time that's really the only goal that we can have realistically. It's like,
Keep going.
yeah, we ride that edge all of the time.
Yeah.
And that's also why it keeps evolving because that's why it's interesting, I think, and why people respond to it or continue to.
Yeah.
Because there's no way you can articulate it into like a tight sentence or like a slogan and like this is what they're doing. It's really hard to understand because it's so deep. The process is so complex. I think even in the studio, we don't really necessarily understand it all the time either. We know what we're trying to do at any given instant, but like how it's all going to add up.
Yeah.
It's so fractal, the amount of information and stuff that's going on, that it's hard to have a bigger overarching view and be like, oh, this is all according to plan. It's not. What
if a larger organization with infrastructure came and said, okay, we're going to put into ACRONYM the infrastructure needed to do whatever it is that you want to do, but in a more commercialized view? Is that of interest to you?
Yeah, sure. But it's also not that easy. We've had so many offers for investment, and I'm like, it's not just the money, right? It's like, it's really hard to expand our factory in Czech Republic because that's the other thing. ACRONYM is made by our own factory. No one else makes it. And when we expand or grow, it means, okay, we have to hire more people and buy more machines and get more space.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, we'll just fill a bigger number in the Excel table and it's good.
Right.
And other people are always like, oh, why don't you just make more? Why don't you just scale up? Or why don't you work with whoever to do it? And it's not that easy because it is actually hard to make.
Yeah.
And the processes we use, they're extremely painstaking, and most people don't want to do that. That's why we have our own factory, because every factory was like, hell no.
Right.
I don't want to why would I do that? Why would I make that? And
I think in the back of your head that if it got to the point where someone wanted to scale it, these questions would be asked of like, well, how do we cut corners, make this cheaper, do this? Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you don't want to enter that discussion.
That's just not what it's about. And although I do feel like there's things that could be applicable and useful to everybody on a day-to-day level at a more accessible price, we're just not that kind of company. We're not at that scale. We'd have to be so big to get those economies of scale to work. It's just fundamentally a different enterprise.
Yeah.
And maybe one day, but it's not like you can't do that in a year or 2 years. It's like, that's a long-term R&D project.
Yeah.
Right? Not that it won't happen, but people underestimate the difficulty of making, unless you're in the industry and you've tried to make something like that, you don't really appreciate it. And, what can I say? Like, it's not like, I know we're on tons of mood boards and have been for years in every company. And honestly, like, if other people could do it, they would. There's no, I don't know.
It's not a secret.
It's not a secret.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's just hard.
Yeah.
And,
is it when like investors look under the hood of your company, they're like, you're crazy?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's been a while now, because now we're just like, we don't really need it. Like, let's just keep going. It's working.
Yeah.
And we're patient, probably to a fault. So we'll see. We're working on things. We're trying to make it more accessible. But if I say that, I'm going to have to listen to where's the cheap version for the next years, right? It's going to take a while. So nobody hold their breath, but we are aware of it. It's a goal. It is a goal. But we have to be realistic about it. It's
just as an aside, do you ever think about if you were able to figure out a way to make it more scalable, how about the sort of like the lore and the collectability of it? Will it go away? And it's kind of like what Kanye's dealing with now, where like he's trying to make his shoes more accessible, and in doing that, they maybe become less covetable.
I guess there's always that balance. I think with ACRONYM, it's a special case because there's always the utilitarian aspect of it. One of the things that I noticed is that, it always worked. Before there was hype about ACRONYM, it still worked. It's like, there is something about it that even with no external information or validation, somebody walking up to a piece cold sees it or tries it or touches it, and it's like, what is this? This is cool. I like this. There's something, it resonates on its own in a vacuum.
Yes.
So because of that, I think we're somewhat insulated from that effect. And
I see what you mean. There's still that true functionality aspect.
There's an intrinsic value to the thing.
Yes.
It's not just a branding or a stylistic exercise.
Or based on a trend or anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, it can't be, because it just takes too long to make things that are based on trends for us. Like, it's like we'll just miss it by like a year and a half. There's no...
Yeah, that's why it's always black.
That's actually not why it's all black, but it's almost like that. Yeah.
I remember when you released like Olive, I was like shocked. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, progress. No, I mean, the color thing is also people, we didn't make a black jacket until the second year. The first jackets were not black. It was very dark gray and very light gray. Funny enough. Yeah. But, and then the reason when we started doing little capsule collections, the reasons we had black was because of order minimums. And we couldn't dye our own colors, and the color that everybody had on stock was black.
Yeah.
So it was black.
Yeah.
that was it. So, but I don't think ACRONYM, like I said, it wasn't conceived of as a specific take on a lifestyle or a trend or an aesthetic idea. It's an aesthetic and a technical approach. It's a methodology.
Yeah.
So I think that functions independent of how it's communicated or how much it costs. So it could work, I think, in different ways at different levels.
When you keep saying we, but how many people is ACRONYM now? Including all the factory people and everything.
I'm going to guess it's about 60.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but that's including people who are actually sitting down and making the stuff and taping the jackets and
which is your team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the team.
Yeah. Do you ever think about starting something else?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've actually done it effectively. We've started a few brands, right? Like they might be sub brands or capsule collections, whatever you want to call them, but they're all new projects.
You mean like Shadow or?
Yeah. Or Shadow, or we were involved very heavily in Valence for Arc'teryx at the beginning. The ACG reboot, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, and the way we treat them is, the principles we use to do it, it's not just, this should just work for a year. It's like, no, we're going to figure this out, and then it should be able to function for however long. So,
but I mean, do you ever dream of doing something that doesn't take like years to develop one thing, like a stupid, simple, fun thing?
Absolutely. I'm so jealous of like fashion designers who just do fashion. You're just like, oh, it looks cool, finished.
Right.
It's like sometimes I'm like, damn.
Or like,
wouldn't it be fun to do that? Yeah,
but antisocial, like just
there's definitely that's
like,
valid too, right? It's
valid.
It's an expression, and it's but I also know that other people are better at that. And
than you. You have your
we have
expertise.
our thing that we can do, and I think kids ask, like, do you have advice for young designers?
Yeah.
I was like, find the thing that only you can do. That's what it is, because then you can protect it.
You own it. Yeah.
You own it. You can protect it.
Right.
That's it. Don't try and do whatever else. You're at a disadvantage from go.
Yeah.
Right. You need to be like, no, this is my unfair advantage, and then you need to exploit it and use it.
Okay, let me ask you that in another way. If you were to have conceived of ACRONYM this year and you're starting ACRONYM today, how would you do it differently?
Oh my God. I would probably take a year to figure it out first.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. So
not just make that first kit yet, like just
I mean, even when we did it back then, it took us 3 years
to make that first
to
kit.
figure it out. Like, so we're all about the long game, and it's always that's just who we are. I don't know. Yeah.
So maybe the same.
It might be the same. No, it would probably be a direct to consumer thing. Obviously, that's probably the only fundamental difference that I could pin down right now and be like,
the product might be almost identical.
Yeah, maybe. It really depends on the contacts I have and the resources that I have at hand. That's but obviously just going to try and take those and maximize them. But that's a hard one to answer, actually.
Well, cool, man.
Come back to me in a year and I can tell you.
All right. Well, we look forward to the new shit that you're going to be dropping.
Very soon, actually. Actually, I don't know when this is going to air, but yeah. I mean, we're always dropping stuff.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's always the same thing. I always joke that every product that ships is a little victory. Like, and it is, because it's still really hard to do. Understand? That's the truth of it. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yep. All right. Later.
Good fun. Good fun. Good fun. Good fun. Good fun. Good fun.